Well, as I mentioned last week, my book on the brilliant Barry Humphries is released this week, The Many Lives of Barry Humphries, in which I not only tell the story of my own personal relationship with Barry right up until his tragic passing earlier this year, but more importantly, I interview some of the many actors, comedians, artists, musicians, filmmakers, friends and family of Australia's very own Renaissance man, Barry Humphries, including one of my very favourite Australian comedians and the mastermind behind so many of our great comedy shows, Steve Vizard. Who can forget this classic?
You saw someone else wearing those over-the-knee boots you bought in Milan.
Much worse than that.
You ran out of your favourite henna?
No, worse even than that, stupid.
Give up.
I was in the cockpit where the captain was sucked out.
Can't beat classic comedy, Steve. Great to see you. Great to see you, Steve. So fantastic.
Surely there must have been another clip.
No. There were many, but they're all so great. They're all so great. Steve, you're a mastermind, one of Australia's greatest comedians.
Oh, wow.
There are literally thousands of great takes. How important was Barry Humphries? You knew him well as, I guess, the godfather of Australian comedy. How important was he to Australian creativity?
He was a giant. He was the equivalent of. He was our Oscar Wilde. He was our Mark Twain. He right up to the very end. His life was as he was living life full as a Catholic school, as he would have said. Or full as a fairies phone book, as he would have politically incorrectly said. Full as the seaside shithouse boxing day, as he would have said. That's how he lived his life. And when you think about it. Many performers would be regarded as having completely full careers if they performed for 6 or 7 years. I mean, that would be a great career. He performed at the highest level internationally for 6 or 7 decades. And he charted the life of Australia, not just his own career, he charted the life of a nation for 6 or 7 decades. He started in the 40s and in the 50s. His first big Dame Edna sketch was at the Olympics when he was offering up Edna's house. She wasn't a dame then, Edna's house in Moonee Ponds for guests for the forthcoming Melbourne Olympics. And she was offered to have an Alsatian and a Dane staying with her, and she wondered how they'd go with her fox terriers. Through the 60s and through miniskirts and 70s and freeing up Australia through Gough Whitlam, through that era, and then the 80s, the 90s, decades and decades of Australian change, Barry Humphries charted through the course of his brilliant characters. You know, Dame Edna, of course, was the one that was most noted. That.
Whoop, we've just frozen there, Steve. Rita.
Well, he did have great international success, but at his heart, he was a Melburnian, and it's all where it all started. And Steve, interested in your response to what happened with the Melbourne Comedy Festival, for them to get rid of the Barrys, rename the Barrys in response to Barry Humphries not being sufficiently politically correct. That stung him, that hurt him.
It did hurt him, and to the point, as we now discover, he didn't want his commemorative service in Melbourne. He regarded Melbourne as having, the establishment of Melbourne as having some way turned its back on him at a critical time. What I'd say about that is this: I mean, Humphries had strong views in what he expressed on stage, but he was a libertarian. His view was that they were his views, but other people should be able to express their views. He saw the purpose of the stage, and indeed the purpose of comedy, of humour, as being provocative. He didn't posit his solutions as being final. And in fact, it was clear that whilst they were strongly held in the form of characters and their lines and their viewpoints, they were his viewpoints. And I think he always saw comedy as a provocation. And the danger, I think, is lot of comedy these days as being posited as a solution, as this is how it has to be. And I think that'd be the key distinction between the way he practiced comedy, that is, as opening up a discussion to some comedy, and indeed some dialogue today as closing down discussion.
And I wanted to follow up on that because, there's this whole thing we talk about in comedy today where they put it all in power relations, and punching up versus punching down. Yet a lot of what he did was kind of punching up, like Sir Les Patterson. And I'm just wondering, does Australia, do you think, and would hear thought, take itself too seriously today that it can't, there can't be that sort of universal humor that makes fun of our foibles as a nation?
It is the purpose of comedy, someone said, to patrol the boundaries of a society. It's the very purpose of comedy to puncture and promote, provoke, to pinprick, to make us question. And it's going to overstep the mark. It's by definition, if it's working on the boundaries, and in fact, the very purpose of working on the boundaries is to help us form a view of what's permissible and what's not. So it's always going to be patrolling the boundaries. That's what great comedy does. That's what Humphries did. So to the extent that we shut down that patrol...
We've frozen again, Rita.
Just on that issue, do we have a problem in this country in particular where our comedians are more interested in getting right on applause and in making a political point than actually getting laughs? Has the main aim of comedy been lost, which is to be funny? Now, we see people like Dave Chappelle and Ricky Gervais pushing the envelope and being outrageously funny, but do you feel like there's a climate of self-censorship a little bit in this country, Steve?
There's been a change in the way comedy's done, I think. As I was saying, I think comedy, and this is worldwide, it's not just Australia. Comedy used to be an opening up. It used to be a lot in the form of characters, for example, characters that were imagined characters. So the author of the characters, the performer, wasn't themselves making a political point of their own. They were positing a character, making a preposterous proposition. There's been a shift now to a much more authorial view of performance. The performer is expressing not a character's view of life, not someone else's preposterous view of life, but their performance is almost intrinsically aligned to their own views, politically, culturally, socially, and so with that comes a clear enunciation of.
Steve, I've referred to Barry Humphries in my book as a kind of Renaissance man. I love the story you told me about when you took him around the art gallery. Just remind us of that story, because he was so much more than just an actor. He was a comedian, he was an artist, a painter, he was a musician, and you had a strong friendship with him. Tell us about it.
I was walking around the National Gallery of Victoria with him, and we were looking at the paintings, and I said, how do you see yourself as an artist? And he sort of stopped one of his dramatic pauses. He said, artist? I'm a collector. And I said, collector? And of course, he was a collector. He collected Condor, he collected paintings, he collected literature, first editions. But he was fundamentally a collector of something greater than that. He was a collector of colloquialisms, of expressions, of characters. He was a collector of what made a nation tick. And I think, as I said to you, he did something extraordinary every night. Every night on a stage, he stood there and unveiled his collection before an audience. And we laughed in self-recognition. He'd collected us. And then he collected something else. He collected laughter, and he collected applause, and he collected our undying admiration. He self-effacingly said he was a collector.
Fantastic, Steve. And I believe he said to you that when you get used to Federation Square about the time you get used to having leprosy. He wasn't a great fan. He wasn't a great fan of modern architecture.
It's hideous.
Steve Vizard, thanks so much for coming on Outsiders today. We might get you back again, mate. You're pretty good. You're good on telly.
No. You've cut into my Bunnings sausage time, but and interestingly, on the Macy's Street Parade, you missed the biggest thing of all. The Bluey was there. There was a huge inflatable Bluey going down the street, and that overtook everything.
Fantastic. Steve Vizard, thanks so much for sharing that with us this morning. And as I said, Steve Vizard's recollections are just some of the treasure trove of reminiscences and photos, along with those of Geoffrey Rush, Kathy Lett, Ray Martin, Bruce Beresford, Alan Jones, and many, many more in my book, The Many Lives of Barry Humphries. Limited pre-Christmas print run, so don't miss out. Go straight to www.michaelwilkinsonpublishing.com.au.